So the EFF has reiterated its objection against the National Prosecuting Authority receiving external funding from private donors. The NPA has reportedly received about 43 million rand in this fiscal year. The EFF argues that private funding may compromise the independence of this prosecuting body. For years now, the NPA has cited funding as a major challenge to carrying out its work, or perhaps I should say underfunding. Let's get your reaction on the story. Bring in DA MP Advocate Glynnis Breytenbach, who's also a member of the Portfolio Committee on Justice. Advocate Breytenbach, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks as always for making time. I mean, in principle, do you get the point that the EFF is making here?
I certainly get the point that they're making, and their fears are not unreasonable. Having said that, the NPA is seriously underfunded and seriously under-resourced as a result.
Right.
And for years, since 1994, the NPA has always accepted donations from third parties. The Specialized Commercial Crime Unit, for instance, in the NPA, was founded practically completely on donor funding from USAID, and it was facilitated by Business Against Crime at that time, in cooperation with the National Prosecuting Authority, of course, and with the Department of Justice. But and any donations need to be very carefully managed, and you need to be very circumspect about where you accept donations from. But donations to the NPA are not a bad thing, and they do not compromise the independence of the NPA.
Right.
The National Prosecuting Authority must be fiercely independent, and when you donate money to the NPA, you cannot expect anything for your money except that you're assisting the NPA to do a better job. So there can never be favors asked or granted, never, and that's always made very clear up front. There is absolutely no question of any quid pro quo. There is none. You donate the money, and that's the end of it. There's no advantage for you except that you are donating towards improving the criminal justice system in South Africa, which is to the benefit of everybody.
Right. Optics matter when it comes to the National Prosecuting Authority, especially because of the role of reporting around the NPA over the past couple of years. I wonder how that could be better managed, because for people who aren't following the money trail and skeptics in our country who are very justifiably worried about whose hand might be greased if the NPA can get this money from third parties, how do we better give that assurance that even though this money is coming through, there isn't any ulterior motive really?
Look, we're not talking about bits and bobs of money that can be confused with greasing palms and bribes. Not at all. We're talking about large donations from credible donors who have unimpeachable track records, and usually are foreign donors who have no interest in quid pro quo from the NPA, and neither would they get any. The funding is transparent. It's declared in their annual report for everyone to see. It's managed via strict processes through the Treasury. It's not like individual prosecutors go off and raise a couple of bucks, not at all. The National Prosecuting Authority as an institution, their top management, their EXCO, manages those donations. There's a strict regime with Treasury about how those donations are sourced, how they are imported into the NPA, and even how they're used. It's not that they can be used for just anything.
Yeah.
And so there is a strict control system in place. I think they are transparent. If they could possibly be more transparent, that wouldn't hurt. But I don't think they've got any objection to being transparent. It's just fundraising isn't the core function of the National Prosecuting Authority. Prosecuting is.
Sure.
So I wouldn't say no concerns. I think it's a process that must be managed. It's a process that must be observed. It's a process that must be carefully controlled. And certainly the Portfolio Committee should keep a very close eye on that process. But inherently, fundamentally, I I'm not uncomfortable with the NPA receiving donations. They've always done it, and it's always been responsibly managed. And there's never been any question of donors getting favorable treatment or more favorable treatment or not being prosecuted. Not at all. That's never been the case. There is no quid pro quo. There are no favors granted.
Right. Of course, an easy way to eliminate any of the speculation and conjecture is to have the NPA be fully funded by the state. And I can imagine for many South Africans who are listening to our discussion, it's a bit of a bitter pill to swallow, because on the one hand, we hear in, year out, about billions of rand that are wasted in fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And on the other, we hear of the NPA once again going to Parliament, decrying the crippling underfunding that they're battling.
Look, it would be, the ideal situation would be if we could put an end to this constant thievery of state monies. South Africa is not a poor country. We could certainly fully fund our National Prosecuting Authority.
Right.
If there were better controls about taxpayers' money. But that unfortunately right now is not the case, and we all know, that the ANC is just masquerading as a racketeering organization. And so, as long as that's the case, there will not be enough money to fully fund the NPA, and they are seriously underfunded, which means they are seriously under-resourced. They have too few prosecutors to do the job. They cannot compete with the private sector as far as retaining staff are concerned. So they train and they train and they train, and as soon as the prosecutors reach a level of proficiency, they're headhunted into the private sector and off they go for much more money. The NPA can never compete with that. They have no access to, literally very little access to cyber forensic capability, to accounting forensic capability. None of those skills are available to them because they simply don't have the money.
Yeah.
While the crooks out there, the organized crime out there has access to the very best of everything and runs rings around them. So as long as that's the case, it will be a battle that is very hard to win.
Sure. Any person who gives of their money, either from the private sector or from government, would want to feel at the very least that there are great returns. I imagine even for these donors who are giving money to the NPA, they're watching with great interest whether or not that money is going anywhere, quite frankly. Just this past week, we were speaking about how it's been a year since Raymond Zondo released his report around state capture. And, the overriding sentiment has been this question around whether or not the NPA has moved far enough in ensuring that that work leads to the kind of prosecutions that many people are hoping for.
Well, contrary to Parliament's reaction, I hold the view that Justice Zondo was entirely entitled to make the comments he made in the capacity in which he made them, and they're not comments that should be ignored. Very little has been done with the state capture report from Parliament's side and certainly from the NPA. I, for one, would like to have seen them move faster. On the other hand, there's a general misunderstanding that the information gathered in the Zondo Commission is evidence. It's not. It's evidence in the sense of a commission of inquiry is completely different to evidence in a criminal prosecution setup where you have to prove your facts beyond reasonable doubt. So that evidence or information from the Zondo Commission now has to be authenticated, has to be fully investigated, and has to be transformed into evidence that will stand the test of beyond reasonable doubt. That's not an easy task, and there's a lot of information that emanated from the Zondo Commission, and it will take years to prosecute those cases. Would I have liked to see them move faster? Certainly I would have. Given the lack of capacity, both financial and human, I'm not sure that it's entirely realistic to have, expected all of those cases to suddenly appear on a court roll. They have a limited amount of prosecutors who can prosecute that type of case. There are very limited amount of members of the police, of the Hawks in particular, who can investigate that kind of case, and it takes time. If there was more money and there were more people, then of course the process would have been much quicker.
Absolutely. Advocate Glynnis Breytenbach, it's great getting your take on the story. I appreciate your time on Newzroom Afrika this Sunday morning. Advocate Glynnis Breytenbach is, of course, a DA MP, also a member of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Justice.